Thank you, Alan. Listen, I always like to inquire what stood out for you as you read this letter. What is most pertinent to your life as you today?
Well, I would have to say that this is the second ambush I feel like I've had tonight. Uh,
So there was nothing about ambush in there, by the way, Alan. Come on now, stay
no,
focused.
no, the promises of recovery in my life that I've experienced have come slowly over a period of time, and what uh, what I always get out of this is the fact that there is more to discover, and
Nicely
you
said.
know, uh, the regular process of, I come from that neck of the woods that believes that there's only one defect of character, and that's fear. And all my shortcomings are directly related to that fear. I've heard your sponsor, talk about, the ego, egocentric fear of either being afraid that I'm not going to get what I want or lose what I have. Uh, and and I've looked at that, and I'm someone who's been close to death several times.
Wow.
So I have put put aside, that kind of thing, and uh, what I've been able to incorporate in my recovery, and I have to admit, with your help, you know, is a way of examining my life on a daily basis. Using the principles that I've incorporated into my life by working the steps with a sponsor, and I'm somebody who I live in the 11th step, but my favorite step is the second. And I've been personal friends with your sponsor and your grand sponsor before that for years and years and years.
Yes, I
And
know.
I've told you this before, that you've learned your lessons well. So
Thank you.
I'm hoping I'm learning mine now. So thank you so much.
That's great, great, great. Well, it's wonderful to have you here, Alan, and I appreciate, I hope you guys can hear how well grounded he is in his recovery. And there's a lot of wisdom in you, and I really appreciate. Pay attention to his posts in the chat room because he brings in such wonderful thoughts from the NA literature, which Alan is very well read in and versed in. So thank you for your contribution on an ongoing basis to this meeting, Alan. And it was a
A lot,
delight
a
to
lot of what we have there is thanks to Thom.
I know, isn't it? It's amazing. His contribution to the program has been profound, as it has been to my life. That's true. Well, if you're just joining us tonight for the first time, there are a few people, and I see Felice is here. I think from Shanghai, if I remember right. Um, Welcome, Felice, and welcome to anyone else that's joining us. We are right now in the process of going through the 12 and 12, which was written in 1950, and trying to unpack Bill's ideas in the 12 and 12 that relate to emotional sobriety. Now, we were inspired to do that because Bill was very, very clear when he was writing the 12 and 12. And he said this in step 12 when he was kind of summarizing things. He says, if we practice all of these principles in our daily lives, that we and those about us will find or may find emotional sobriety, I think is the way he said it. I think I said, will find emotional sobriety. So what that means, and this is to me of the best kept secret in the rooms, is that our goal in working the 12 steps is first, of course, to break the bonds of our addiction. I mean, the work that we need to do to achieve emotional sobriety in our life cannot take place if we're getting, drunk or high or whatever, in whatever ways that we're our addiction has manifested ourselves, if we're acting that out. But once we break the bonds of our addiction, the steps are really focused on helping us achieve emotional sobriety. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, what is emotional sobriety? Well, we got a little bit of an idea from what Alan wrote about that it's this real maturity and balance in our life. And then he goes on to say, which is humility in relationship to ourself, to others, to God. I would include also humility in relationship to life. Well, there's other times where we've talked about what maturity is and what balance is, but just a quick reminder of the maturity, because that's really very central right now to what we're talking about with the 12 steps. It's best to define maturity as moving beyond what psychologists have called environmental support, meaning looking to the environment for our sense of self, for our self-esteem. We called it other validated self-esteem, looking for our environment to support us. And it's moving away from that or transcending that to learning how to provide that support for ourselves. Now, this is not radical individualism. That's not what we're talking about here, because we recognize that we are always in relationship to the environment. We're always in relationship to other people. None of us survive in a vacuum. But what Bill was helping us take a look at is that it's my responsibility to be able to meet my environment in a way that gets my needs met. And if I can't do that, then it's very important for me to be able to experience my disappointment, to grieve, that it wasn't possible. And so when I'm operating from that center of gravity, meaning that the center of gravity is in myself, I haven't put it in my environment, I have emotional freedom. I become the determining force in my life. Problems are no longer problems. Problems are only problems depending on my inability to cope with the situation. So emotional sobriety, in just a nutshell, is really related to growing up. In fact, lately I've said that what we suffer from is a growth disorder. We're all just stuck. And Bill saw that emotional sobriety is about growing up. And so that's what we're doing here on Thursday nights, is really starting to understand what does it mean to grow up, and what does it mean to unhook our expectations from the environmental support or from this emotional dependency that he describes so well in this letter that we write or that we read an excerpt from each time. What does it mean to start supporting ourselves? And we're digging into the steps and we're learning about that. We're now at step 5, and one of the things I review each time is that each step builds on the experience of the step before that. This step moves wonderfully to what's next. So step 1 creates this existential crisis. I'm emotionally dependent. I have no idea how to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm unable to have any idea about this. We could say I am powerless. I am helpless. Bill even said the foundation of recovery is built on a bedrock of hopelessness. I can't figure this out. So that admission creates this existential crisis. I've got a serious problem and I have no idea what to do about it. That energy, that crisis, makes us ready, prepares us for step 2. In fact, it moves us in the direction of step 2. We create a charge, and now that charge needs to be somehow resolved or discharged. And step 2 comes along and wonderfully offers us hope that we can be restored to sanity. Thinking of sanity as sound thinking. When we're emotionally dependent, our thinking is not sound, not at all. Our judgments are quite impaired by that emotional dependency. We have no idea what balance looks like. All of everything, I'm out of whack when I'm operating out of that emotional dependence. So now step 2 creates a new charge, because faith without works is meaningless. It's just a fantasy. So now I have this hope. What am I going to do to realize this? How can I start this journey that I need to do? How can I start to wake up? And step two that comes along and says we make a decision, right? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to care of God as we understood him. I talk about that is now turning our care and our lives over to a force. Some people don't have a God in the religious sense of it, but I like to think of that the God that's in us moves us towards wholeness, towards being complete. And now I'm making a decision to let this true self, to discover this true self and to listen to that and to align myself with the best in me instead of the worst in me. And so I make this commitment, and that's what we did. That's step three. But now that makes a new charge. We made a decision. Now what are we going to do? That puts us up now. That sets us up for what's going to come next, because the charge is, all right, I've made a decision. What's next? And what's next is taking the inventory. And we've talked at length about that. So if you want to catch up, all of these videos are posted on the new YouTube channel, and you can go back and review and see how we got to step 5, which we're on now. So we take an inventory. We're told this is what we need to do next. After the inventory, now we're asked to share it, because the inventory creates a charge. I have all of this new awareness of myself, these things that I finally had the courage to face, and enough curiosity to start digging around, especially in the corners of my psyche and in the corners of my soul, and shining light where I didn't want any light to be shown. And I start to see some things that need to be dealt with. And for maybe the first time in my life, I'm facing myself in what needs to be cleaned up. Now, we talk about all of this being the second first step, or starting with the second first step, which is looking at the unmanageability of our life that our emotional dependency has caused. So all of the things that I've just described are in the service of understanding that and unpacking that and developing more and more an awareness of that. And so that's what we're doing. Acceptance, an awareness of ourselves and what I'm doing is a prerequisite to change. And that's what's happening here in all of these steps, especially steps 4 and 5. I am now owning who I am and what's going on, so I can prepare myself to make some changes. These steps 4 and 5 are preparation to change. And so we do the inventory, and now we're sharing that step 5, admitted to ourselves and to God the exact nature of our wrongs. So that's what we're going to be picking up and talking about tonight. I started this discussion last time, and I want to continue it tonight. So I've got a few slides that I prepared. Here we are at step 5. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Wow. So what Bill said about this, he says the real test of the situations of the situation that we're confronting with step 5 are your willingness to confide and your full confidence in the ones with whom you share your first accurate self-survey. But what does he mean by our first accurate self-survey? One of the things that happens with addiction is that our awareness of ourselves and what we're doing has to be constricted. You hear people describe it as denial. What it really is a narrowing of your consciousness. We don't want to see what we don't want to see. We don't want to see the things that we're not willing to address and to deal with. We don't want to challenge what we're doing because we think what we're doing is the right thing. You see, it's an amazing thing that addiction really hijacks all of our judgment and our perception. Some people call it a disease of perception, right? Addiction. And it does that because it takes over your brain. Because if you're an addict like I am different. I can't use and drink like other people Bill Wilson says it's like men who have lost their legs, we're never going to grow new ones. That is so true for me. I have no doubt about that. And that's true whether you have what we call experiential addictions, where you into gambling or acting out sexually, or if you have a food addiction, doesn't matter if this addiction is managing your life, then you have lost the ability to take to see what's going on. Now, as we start to get sober and clean in our life, and meaning that we broke the bonds of our addiction, we start to see ourselves, and Herb likes to describe it as thawing out. We can also think of it as waking up. We go through a process of starting to wake up. We start getting clear-headed enough to start to take a look at ourselves and get honest with ourselves. The first first step was our first accurate self-survey. This second first step is probably our first accurate self-survey around our emotional dependence. That's what this is about. Now, we're going to talk about who to go to and who to take this fifth step with. And I like to think of that person as an enlightened witness, and we'll get into what qualifications or what characteristics does that person have to have a little later on in what I'm going to share with you this morning. But give me 1 second. So what is an enlightened witness, right? Well, I think the qualities of an enlightened witness are as follows. We want that person to have a certain amount of wisdom gained through their own personal suffering, and that they've met that suffering and they've done their own work. When you digest your suffering in the right way, you will become wise. When you digest your suffering in the right way, you'll become wise. If you don't, and you just get into what we say, objecting to your suffering and falling into self-pity, you totally lose the lesson. A brilliant, brilliant tennis player, Billie Jean King, said, if you lose, don't lose the lesson. If you suffer, don't lose the lesson. And it's very important that we meet and we embrace our suffering and that we unpack it and try to understand it. And that's what Bill was suggesting. If you're upset, take a look at what's going on. If you dig into that, oftentimes you're going to see that you've got an expectation that was based on some unhealthy dependence. And that you're saying to yourself, I'd be okay if everything went my way. And we want someone who can see the folly of that way. As Blake said, if a fool persists in his follies, he will become wise. I love that statement. If a fool persists in his follies, we will become wise. We want that person to be humble. We want that person not to have a personal agenda with us about who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to work our program, what meaning are we supposed to get out of it. You know, Alan was talking about my sponsor, Thom. I am forever grateful that Thom never tried to get me to work the program he thought I should work. He helped me discover what I needed to do in my life to grow up. That was so important to have that, because I probably would have bolted. I mean, I was a rebel when I came in here, an anarchist. I didn't want anybody to tell me what to do. And Thom knew that because he was like that too. He understood that about me. My God. I think I've shared with you when I met him, I was in combat fatigues and he walked in this hippie with his hair pulled back in a ponytail with wire rimmed glasses, and he was going to share a story with about 30 combat Marines that just got back from Vietnam. And this guy was probably out protesting the war while he was high, marching around. So that acceptance of me as I am and being able to see me not in the way he thought I should be, but in the way I was an unbelievable experience for me. The first person I met that didn't have an agenda for me other than wanting to share with me freely what he had been given. That was it. I kept trying to see if there was another motive because I was very distrustful and suspicious, but none. He's still my sponsor. I'm coming up on 54 years, and he's still my sponsor after 54 years. You want this person that's listening to you to be able to listen beyond what you are saying. In one way, you want them to hear what you are not able to say yet. You see, this becomes so important. And listen, trust me, the requirements that I'm laying out here, there are a few people that can meet these. Trust me. So, if you get somebody that can approximate some of these things, get a hold of them, grab a hold of them, because these are pretty high-minded, rigorous like what do we say in the big book? What in order? I can't go through with it. These are quite requirements, but they're very important. If you find someone like this, get a hold of them. But they can hear what you're not able to say. You see, when I was with Thom, there were things that I was feeling that I either didn't have the courage to put words on, or I just didn't have the words to be able to describe my experience. He had this incredible gift where he was able to help me find that courage to say the things that I didn't dare want to say. And he did it in a beautiful way. He says, I got a hunch you didn't talk about something like this, but let me share my experience in that area of my life. And when he did, it set me free. I realized that I wasn't so darn unique. And it was such an experience of freedom. I can only go back and look. I've done the fifth step with Thom probably at least half a dozen times, if not more, since I've known him over these 54 years on a lot of different issues in my life. But it was remarkable how he would get a sense to be able to share that with me just when I needed to. Or he would describe an experience he had. Like once he was talking about how he felt when he met his sponsor, Floberg. And what he was saying about her was that he was sitting around and he had this vibe from her, like an aura, I guess you could say. And the aura is that she had a sense that no matter what, she was going to be okay. She had a consciousness that today I would describe as, I'm okay even if things don't turn out the way I think they should. She was so grounded in her life and in her relationship to God that she was unshakable. And Thom said to me, when I met her, I didn't have these words, but inside me, I had the sense that if I could achieve what I see in this woman, that I could make this life work. Wow. That was exactly what I felt when I met him. The same thing. I had the same experience he had with his sponsor. That happens a lot when we meet people in the program, especially someone that has something that really attracts us to who they are and how they're living their life. This person also has the ability to see what you can become. They can see past who you are now and know that your addict or your addiction, your addict self is only a part of who you are. And that because you're much more than that, you suffer. If you were only that, you wouldn't have any conflict inside. If you were only that, there would be no possibility for recovery. Because the fact that we have more than that inside of us is what wakes up when we start to come to these rooms. When we come to these rooms. And that's what Thom saw in me. He saw that I was so much more than what I was presenting him with at the time that we met. I described that today as he had a faith in me, and I didn't have that faith in myself. He saw something in me that I wasn't able to see yet. But the fact that he saw it and the fact that he had that faith in me carried me a long way. And that gets us to the next one. That this enlightened witness will provide you with as much support as you need to take the journey you're on, but with as little as possible. Now, what does that mean? Now, remember, the 12 steps are to help us grow up, to help us now mature in our life. That means self support. So if I just relied on Thom all the time for solutions for everything, I would become dependent on him. I'd have emotional dependency. And if he wasn't around me, then I wouldn't know what to do with my program. I wouldn't know how to live my life. I wouldn't know how to work my program. There's an interesting thing that he shared with me. He said he was about, I think, around 6 years in the program, maybe 5 years. And his sponsor, Flowbird, took a bunch of people and moved to the Big Island. He was on Oahu. And Thom said, okay, want me to get my stuff together? And she turned to him and said, honey, you're not coming. And he looked at her and goes, what? What do you mean I'm not coming? I'm a part of this. I'm a part of this group. I mean, no, honey, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet. You can't come with me. Oh my God, it threw him for a loop. But he looks back, and it was one of the best things that happened in his recovery because it forced him to find himself and to find his 2 feet. So, this enlightened witness that we're sharing the exact nature of our wrongs with helps us put our experience in perspective, help us put our relationship with our problems in perspective, helps us put our relationship with life in perspective, helps us put our relationships with a higher power of our understanding in perspective. It really becomes a person that starts to really, as Herb likes to say, hold up the lantern and light the way. Bill says this, even when you have found this person, it frequently takes great resolution to approach him or her. No one ought to say the AA program requires no willpower. Here is one place you may require all you got, or the program requires all you got. So it's a myth when we say that the program, that we've got to surrender our willpower. There's a difference in terms of using your willpower to enhance your life, using your willpower and keeping it aligned with becoming what you can be with your true self versus using your willpower in destructive ways that are aligned with our addiction or our false self. So that's another thing we're learning, is that you do have free will, and the choices you make, especially, and this is the way that so many people pointed out, but especially Dr. Viktor Frankl, he said, there's a space between a stimulus and our reaction. He says, in that space is our choice. In that choice is where we discover our power. He says, try to live in that space. What I would say to you, in that space is where you will discover your emotional sobriety.
My experience with the fifth step that was effective began when I didn't even know what a fifth step was. The hospital asked me to write out my quote inventory. They didn't use that term. They said my autobiography of my relationship with alcohol. And I did that. Then they had me read it out. When I wrote it out, I saw that I had a problem. When I read it out loud to a small group of people, I experienced it.
Hmm.
I didn't just know it, I experienced it for the very first time. And now I see that as sort of the dynamic of the confession and or of therapy and or of the fifth step. Uh, when I read my fifth step in a few hours, I had prepared a fourth step that took several months. And I had seen some things, especially in the dialogue in doing the fourth step, But again, when I did the fifth step, and Bill in 12 and 12 talks about the deflation of the ego, and in other places he calls it the deflation of the ego at depth. And Alan, you talked about humility and didn't realize that step 5 had that in 12 and 12. It certainly has it in the big book in terms of the um, prayer itself. Humbly ask, the step itself, and then in the 12 and 12, a nice treatise on humility. And you use the term perspective. I think it's the best definition of humility. And we're connecting it to, as you did all throughout your conversation tonight, with emotional sobriety, is a perspective on seeing the truth of uh, reality. It just is. And that's such a simple, but such a powerful realization from people when I say it and they really hear it. And I think that's part of the role of in the fifth step of the person who's hearing a fifth step is to truly just listen. You use the term witness, and to realize this is not a therapy, this is not a discussion, this is not teaching in the sponsorship standpoint. It's literally listening, witness in a sacred way to somebody's history and somebody's journey. And there's no right or wrong. It's not a place to correct or teach people and or to give them a whole lot of feedback is my sense. It's really not a discussion. I tell people that uh, when you hear a fifth step, the person who's reading their fourth step does about 90% of the talking, just to give a ratio. There's no ratio, but I'm just trying to give a proportionality. And about 10% of maybe comment or feedback or asking questions. The man who took me through the steps was brilliant in asking questions, not giving me necessarily answers. And he had one, and I'll end with this, he had one major theme: no secrets. He started out our relationship that way. He when I knocked on his door that Saturday morning, he opened the door and he said, "Have you made up your mind to keep anything back? If you have, go home. You're wasting my time." Good morning, Jerry. And so yeah. So it's a very, very powerful step to give and also to receive. Thanks.
Yeah. One of some of what you describe, Herb and what Alan too, but what you're just saying there, some of that is in good therapy. I mean, it's like, one of the things I've said, and I think I've said this to you, Alan. I'm gonna before I drop off the face of the earth, I think I want to write a book called "Being Helpful for a Living," just to describe all that it means. Because if any of us, you don't have to be a therapist. Any of us who've been or people helpers, I mean, what all does it mean? I mean, how many different stories do we have and different ways of doing that? But it's like I think good therapy is really missing something if we don't have the awareness of when to do what you just described, Herb. Is just shut up, sit back, pay close attention, and because that's, I mean, sometimes, and I both as a client and as a therapist, I mean, and I've missed that as a therapist before because I talk a lot and I have a lot to say, and I often think it's important. It's like, and sometimes it is, but it's not nearly as important as I think sometimes. So it's like I think that's a piece of that. The other thing I wanted to just add in here, Alan, because man, I get a different angle on all of this stuff every time we go back through it. And first of all, I mean, there's nothing about fifth step ever made me think of anything other than respect, but I thought about it so much from what both of you have said in terms of just respect. It's like this is about the person who is doing the fifth step. This is not about how I think you should do it. So what you said is Alan about Thom is never that he was trying to get you to work the program that he wanted you to work. And then, because this is how you guys inspire my little brain to go in different places, I realized you were also describing a good editor. You know, any of us have published and worked with good editors, that's exactly what they do. I'm a horrible editor because if you give me something, Herb, that you want me to edit, I'm gonna send you something back that's how I would have said it. You know, it's like that's not editing. I mean, I've worked with some really good editors, and those people, they get who we are. They read, they listen as they read, they understand the voice of who the person is they're working with, and they make that better. They make, you know, and so that's what you're describing too, Alan. Somebody can really let them put themselves aside and become that mechanism through which this process can happen. So anyway, that's so fifth step now for me is also editing ourselves. So hopefully become better. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I've got two thoughts on this, and one is, I have a well-worn 12 and 12 as I've showed before. Is, I got underlined on page 59 the a solitary self-appraisal, uh, blah blah blah, wouldn't be nearly enough. And I was one of those people. What I love is if you go through the literature enough, you start to see Bill and team, present all the arguments that we have, right? It's like I thought I could just go direct to God with my stuff. I got a relationship with my higher power. I got a direct line. I'm cool. I don't need to tell you any of it.
Mhm.
But, as Alan showed in his slide, that enlightened witness, person who's been through it before and is be able to cut through my BS and help me see the other side of the resentment, whatever it might be. Such a necessary human element that I needed for this process, and I'm glad I finally got to that point. And then the other piece is, again, I like to talked about being on the receiving end as well, and I've had some, for me, very uncomfortable footsteps being read to me. Men who had, been involved in things which, let's just say were some of the worst things you want to kind of experience as a human being, both on giving and receiving end of it. And being that person, that enlightened witness, as you put it, not pushing them away, not shaming them or allowing them to unburden themselves in a way or open the door to healing, when they obviously had been in so much pain for so long with these secrets and had been using drugs and alcohol to anesthetize themselves for so long. That role is sacred. That and to be in a position to be able to help someone heal like that is the highest honor, I think, in this program. So I want to honor that and thank you for putting that slide together. That was wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Tom, on the importance of the human element. I mean, many of us, especially early on, are pretty isolated. And I think there's the importance of, having another human being be there that helps break the denial and help break down some of the shame, to be in a group of people and, share, maybe not at group level, but to share with somebody the things, I've been most ashamed of, and have somebody say, oh, okay, and what else? Or I've done
Mhm.
that too.
Mhm.
That can be transformative. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's the first time some of us have been, I'll speak for myself. I've been, really honest about something for a very, very long time. And I think it takes humility on both ends, the person doing the fifth step and the person receiving it. And
Yes.
that's really beautiful. And
Mhm.
being accepted, if you do have a lucky enough to have an enlightened witness, being accepted by someone who can not only meet us exactly where we're at, and on the other hand, are encouraging us and to be our authentic self, and to balance that self-acceptance with reawakening the desire to grow into what we can become. Um, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many parts of this that are just so important. This step is, we think of this also kind of as part of the initiation into our program. Is when you go share it with another person, it's part of an initiation, right? And it's set up that way, right? It's set up that way is that we need to go to someone else and turn to them, just like a young boy who's going through an initiation to be a man turns to an elder to get some guidance and some direction. And we're being initiated into life in the program and into emotional sobriety. And that's why the first step, and that I can't emphasize the importance, because what we're sharing with this fifth step is the exact nature of our emotional dependence and the impact it's had on our life. See, it's a very different focus this second time around that Ernie Larson was talking about. And I can't emphasize that enough. That's why it's very important to have someone who's done this work, right? Who's kind of really taken a look at this. And, Herb and I have been doing this for what, a couple decades now, maybe even 25 years. Our understanding of emotional sobriety today is much more than it was 25 years ago. I mean, we've evolved a lot in our thinking about that. Thom, I've seen, all of you, Julia, Thom Potash, Thom Rutledge, how much our understanding, like you say, Thom Rutledge, about how, oh my God, more and more keeps being revealed to us about this thing.
Yeah.
And it's so true, man. It's like it's this, we opened up this treasure chest and we keep finding more and more gems inside this chest that are fun to unpack. But here's just a few other thoughts about this step, and then next time we'll be moving on to step 6. There is an incredible therapeutic benefit, and that is one of the things where this does parallel therapy. In fact, a great Gestalt therapist I know, we did this presentation at this Evolution of Addiction conference, and we compared what Gestalt therapy does with what the 12 steps do. And one of the things that we both came up with the conclusion of, that the 12 steps, the arc, what happens as you work the steps is similar to the arc of what happens to you when you're in good therapy in terms of what you experience. And one of the things is there is what they called an abreaction or a catharsis when we start to name some of the things that we've never named before. We share them with another human being. There's a freedom to that, especially if it's done in that sacred atmosphere that you talked about, Herb, the liminal space, right? Remember, Roar talked about that with us a lot. Your fifth step is a liminal space. You're suspending all of the social stuff out there and you're creating a very sacred space to look at this stuff and examine it without judgment, with a pure attempt to understand and to reveal the truth and to sit in the truth together with someone that's not throwing you away. In that way, the fifth step is a corrective emotional experience. Now, what do I mean by that? It may be the first time, and it was for me, that you sit with someone and let someone see who you are without being judged, without being condemned, without being made wrong, without being shamed for who you are and what you've done. Now, think about that. That's a powerful experience, a powerful experience that starts to open us up. And it starts to now introduce the possibility that there's a way that I can be in this world and be okay.
Yep.
There's a way I can be in this world and be okay. I mean, what a gift, right? What an unbelievable gift that is for us to get. And those of us that have been around for a while have experienced that. We really have. We've experienced that gift. So we'll talk next time about how step 5 prepares us for step 6, and we'll get into that next week. But why don't we go ahead and go over any announcements we have, or if you guys want to say anything to what I just said before we wrap tonight, please do.
I just want to say one thing, because I realize this is, and I'm speaking to myself, and I'm sure when I'm speaking to myself, I'm speaking to other people, but this is, I'm thinking of this specifically as me as a therapist, but it's the truth of any of us who are veterans at being there for other people and listening. And it is, I have a tendency to forget about how sacred this is. And I tend to, because I can go in and I can be in this on a day in and day out basis. I think I do a much better job of maintaining as my part of my practice every day to not forget, but I do. And it's like, it's and I forget how important that is, and not like for ego's sake. That's just so important, so that I'm doing my very best to show up as the best I can for somebody else, even if, like what Herb's saying, I'm not saying a thing. It's how I'm showing up. It's like it's because it makes a difference in that. And so anyway, I just think all of us who do this and who are veterans at doing this at various forms, we need, don't ever forget how the responsibility of how important it is what we're doing to be of service to other people.